quite some time, but now he's come out here in Canada, in the province of British Columbia, where he has his practice going on. His areas of practice consist of immigration law, real estate law, civil litigation, and criminal law. In addition, he's active in the community. He's also the Director of Research with Radio India. Without further ado, please welcome the moderator, Loveleen Gill.
Thank you, Saurabh, for the kind introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Today we have gathered here for a panel discussion centered around the topic India's constitutional framework and how it has enabled human emancipation. So we'll begin with a very brief introduction of our esteemed panelists today. So towards my left is Mr. Manish, Consul General of India. He's been a career diplomat. He's also, I'd like to mention, he's also a law graduate himself from University of Delhi, and he has served with distinction for 22 years now. And to further my left, we have Honorable Neetu Badan Smith. She's a judge for Los Angeles County Superior Court in California. Prior to her appointment to the Superior Court, Badan Smith had served as a Deputy Public Defender for Los Angeles County Public Defender's Office. Her work for housing rights is well known in the community. And we also have Honorable Leela Ahi, who is an MLA from Alberta. She has also served as a Minister of Culture, Multiculturalism and Status of Women. Prior to entering into politics, she was a successful entrepreneur and also a professional music teacher. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a big round of applause for our speakers. Talking about the Indian constitutional law, any discussion would be incomplete without acknowledging the genius of its architect. As we know, the constitutional law is a grand norm in any legal system. That means it is the basic law from where everything else originates. So the contribution of the architect of the Constitution should be seen in that perspective, that they are responsible for not only the Constitution, but for generating a whole legal system that affects millions of lives in the coming ages and lays down a foundation stone for a society. So, ladies and gentlemen, please will acknowledge the genius and the architect of this Constitution of India, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar. Please give a big round of applause for his thought and his philosophy. So, I'd like to start the session with a question. So, we'll start with Mr. Manish.
You're first there.
First question to Mr. Manish is, how have the ideas of Baba Saheb Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar impacted or influenced you? And how do you think his approach can be applied to achieve a more equitable and just world?
Thank you very much, and I'm delighted to be in the August panel of judge from USA and MLA from my other province, which I look after, Alberta. Thank you, Loveleen, for the warm introduction. And being a constitutionalist, Baba Saheb had his different view from his other hat, which as a social reformer. So, being a law student, I have myself, as I said, in many other occasions that I've read my Indian constitution hundreds of times, from article to article. So the amazing fact about our constitution is the essence is neatly summarized in the preamble of the Indian constitution. And other important aspect of our constitution is a great inspiration has been taken from world over, and then it was kind of amalgamated. So as a bureaucrat now and as a legal student, I think for me the constitution is like whatever you call it, Bible or the holy book for all of us, because it is where the textbook or testament from which everybody draws inspiration for governance of the country. And it is a detailed book, but it lays down the federal nature of our polity, the governance, how the center, state, panchayati raj system, the rights, fundamental right directive principles. So I am very proud of my constitution, and it is the visionary foresight of chairman, drafting committee chairman like Baba Sahib Ambedkar and many other members who in when they were writing this constitution, they had that vision and foresight of making it such a powerful document which has stood the test of our time. And of course they gave it flexibility also. They did not seal it in a strict jacket thing. They had the vision and foresight that as we grow, as society grows, some flexibility would be needed. So amendment was also introduced in that sense. So I always take inspiration from this and in my daily life. As Baba Sahib always looked for a just and inclusive approach to life. So I think this is one thing which I, as practicing diplomat, I take that value, inclusive approach to like Jan Bhagidari partnership approach in my work. And great to know that, great to tell you that, yeah, of course, this approach has always brought me good dividends. And in Vancouver also, I'm fortunate to have working with partners like Chetna Association and Guru Dalit Dastak, and take the message of Baba Sahib and our freedom fighters forward, and hopefully their teaching, their reason is still relevant. And as some of you would be aware that India took on the G20 presidency in December last year, and you see the motto of the G20 presidency, one Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, one earth, one planet, one family. So, or you see the current leadership approach to life, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. So these are values and philosophy which is still relevant, and there is much more thing. Some of these we have to give to the world, and that is what India is aspiring, or is a Vishwa Guru. And as we travel to the path of our century, now we are 75 years old as a country, we'll be 100 years old, and so this is one journey, a lot of things to be learned, and of course I'm proud to be part of this great country, and I'm very proud of this constitution and what it has given to me. I'll stop. Thank you.
So in preparation for this particular question, I went back and reviewed some of Dr. Ambedkarji's writings. And in 1916, he gave a speech in Columbia at the anthropology department and was talking about the very things that we're still talking about today. An explanation of caste, and really what he was seeking then is an annihilation of caste, and for all of those reasons. And if we look at what global equality is doing today, and one of the things he said even in 1916 was that if caste reached other parts of the world, then the monster that it creates, and as other people have described the cancer it creates, would pass on to other parts of the world. And so how can we use his teachings now to reach some sort of global equality in the world now that it's gone everywhere? Well, it's the same thing. In the United States, in different parts, there's now a movement to have caste recognized as a protected class. Sorry, I have an earring that keeps falling off. Meaning that, if someone is harassed, it qualifies and is hurt, even criminally, it could qualify possibly for a civil case or a criminal case as a hate crime. So once we can get institutions, starting with institutions first, to recognize that this is a protected characteristics and we talk about it as if something you can't control, then we can get the government to recognize it, and then we can have much more awareness as to what's actually happening. Instead of feeling much like any other harassment and based on a class that you cannot control, that you have to hide it. And so the other part of reaching global equality is being outspoken about it, so that we no longer have to be silent about it. But his approach in particular, even when he spoke then, of educate, agitate, and organize, everybody knows those words, is what everybody in these groups are doing today. And that is one way now with both the internet and education that we can continue to have recognition of caste as a protected class for discrimination. And then we can move, in one of the souvenir magazines, one of the articles actually just talked about, why are we still having to talk about caste? I mentioned the 1916 article in the Department of Anthropology because we're in 2023. And we have to get to a point where we should not have to have the conversation about emancipation and equality as it relates at least to caste. And once it becomes a human right, it is a guaranteed right. So I think that's how I would view his teachings, to go there.
Thank you very much, Your Honor. Thank you, Loveleen. Thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here and part of this, and to everyone who put this to the steering committee and all of the volunteers and everyone who's organized this. Very grateful. I want to read you something that actually came from Baba Sahib. And this is really important because you were talking, the Consul General was talking about the relevance of this today. So let me read you something that Dr. Ambedkar spoke about, and that is still extremely relevant to today. The rise in female harassment in all its forms, violence, crime, and humiliation, is only due to political passivity, which has failed to maintain social doctrine, education, work, possibilities, a large population, inflation, and a lack of means to strive are all hurdles that people have to progress. And the mere influence of modern lifestyles and technological adaptation does not imply improvement. So what does that mean? That means that even today, as we talk about in 2023, how far we've come, there's a lot of things to be very proud of. But there's also so much that we're looking at from that perspective today that has not improved. And when we look at equality or emancipation, those two words fall far outside of just the discussion around class. This is about equality for women. This is about equality for minorities. This is about equality in a country that is a very, very young country by comparison to India. We have absolutely no excuse in this country to be falling behind in the areas of freedom and the ability, is particularly for women to live autonomously in this country. And when we lift the value of a woman and a girl child in a country like Canada, we lift everybody together. Because the minute that we recognize that equality, it changes absolutely everything in the way that we perceive how we function, not only within the law, right, where you work and where you function, but also within the policies that come from governments like mine. Because we're looking at it through that lens of how it's impacting every single one of us. Dr. Ambedkar was way ahead of his time. He spoke about this not only when you were speaking about it, but when he also did his huge speech in 1936, I believe it was, on the emancipation, and spoke directly to the issues not only within religion, but also within oppression. And you can imagine for someone like him, who is creating a constitution in the largest democracy in the world. But democracy isn't just an idea. It's not just a a piece of how we do government. It's actually a movement. And in order to maintain democracy, we have to at all times maintain the opportunity to have discussions that are deep and difficult and really move us to make change. Every single person in this room is here because you're looking to see and make change happen. And it's that, believe me when I tell you, I have the privilege of being elected, so I sit at the table. I only got there because people had faith in me to sit at that table. You're the powerhouse. The vote, the people, democracy, and those of you who make those decisions for who are your elected representatives are extremely powerful. So please don't forget how important that is and how much our responsibility is to be able to listen to you and to help make those changes. Thank you.
As we can see, we have received 3 different point of views from our panelists regarding Dr. Ambedkar. So this is the genius of the man that world is still discovering him. We are appreciating his ideas in different fields of human thought. We are studying him in law, sociology. He has done immense work, great work in economy. His thesis was on Indian rupee, in fact, and we have heard views about women emancipation from this panel. So Dr. Ambedkar was the first one to take up this matter, and in fact he resigned from the first cabinet of independent India due to his defenses on women emancipation and women rights. So he was an intellectual giant, and the world is still discovering him. We are discovering this great son of India and what he has, what his thoughts were, and how he is still relevant, and his philosophy, the world is embracing his philosophy even more in coming days. So my next question would be, the Constitution of India, as we know, is built on values of equality, liberty, justice, and fraternity. Constitutional democracies have created legal frameworks based on these ideas, like we can see throughout the world. So these ideas are now universal, not limited just to the Indian Constitution. In different parts of the world, like legal systems have been created based on these ideas, and I'd like to know from our panelists how successful this framework has been in achieving social justice for the global population.
To get a peek in the Indian Constitution, as I said in my earlier remark, we have to go through the preamble and all the selling points or the keywords which Loveleen just mentioned is there. So what does Indian Constitution do? It secures to all its citizens justice, which is defined as social justice, social, economic and political, liberty of thought, expression, faith and worship, equality of status and opportunity, and to promote among all the people of India fraternity, assuring them dignity and individual rights as a nation. And then this gets reflected into a detailed chapter. Inspiration, of course, was from Bill of Rights of United States of America. And then if you go from Article 14 to several articles are there, Article 32 onwards, and right to equality is there, right against discrimination, right to freedom, right against exploitation, right to freedom of religion, cultural education. Right? So each right is there, and if you read any of the article, it very clearly explains that it is all these rights are available irrespective of gender, caste, sex, economic status, and also every article starts with that. So some of the rights are for citizens, some are right for both citizens and non-citizens, and the important thing is that every right is enforceable in the court of law. If my right is challenged, Article 21, Article 32 is there, I can challenge it in Supreme Court of India or the High Court of India. So all fundamental rights is justiciable. So this was a constitutional provision, and which was like a legal framework constitution as a different state, which was supported by executive orders or acts, and untouchability was abolished under an article. Keeping titles was abolished under an article. Then we have a separate chapter on directive principle of state policy. I think we took it from Canada, if I am correct. Then these are not justiciable, but it lays down the policy and vision for each state to provinces in India to work on certain aspects of this thing, irrespective again, religion, caste, gender, etc., etc. And lot of work has been done. As we say, 75 years in a nation's life is a very small. We are still a young nation, and 1.4 billion. We just surpassed China to become biggest country in the world in terms of population. But the trajectory of our development, of course, is on the right path. And as I just mentioned, some glimpse of our philosophy around our G20 presidency and other things. And Baba Saheb was one of the earliest leaders whom we can term as a feminist leader, because gender mainstreaming was his passion and he did it. And the other day we were on the International Women's Day, we hosted one event where we talked in great detail about what India is doing to mainstream empowering women, socioeconomic development and gender equality. So a lot of things has been done, because as far as I am concerned, no country can develop unless and until we develop the women lot of our population. Because as this is a age-old saying which everybody knows, but I will repeat it here. If you educate a woman or empower a man, you are empowering the whole family. So I think a lot of things are being done, and maybe when we come to next point, we'll discuss about some of the examples of what India is doing for the women folks of our country. But I'll stop here. I think a lot of positive discrimination related statutes and acts and everything is there. I mean, you are all aware that there is a positive discrimination in terms of providing job opportunities. There are reservations for scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, economically weaker sections of the society, equal opportunities there. So, I mean, from the government side, things are being done in a proper way. But as a society, we have also to do our bit and helping each other. And as I said, the mantra for the current political leaders is Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas. Until and unless we do it and walk hand in hand, we can't develop and reach to that pedestal as we want to be. We want to be the developed nation by 2047, and this is a very, very important. And as I said, we have to reflect on independence 2.0, and that is another reasons. There are, how do you, especially for the younger lot who is sitting here, how do you want to see our country in next 25 years? And how just talking is not, talking also brings things on the fore, but we have to contribute our bit. So I'll stop here, Lovely, and maybe pass on to the Honorable Judge.
Thank you. So I want to start with just a little bit of background for myself. He mentioned that I was a public defender, and that work in criminal law is based in the Constitution. It's a guaranteed right if you cannot afford an attorney in a criminal court. So much of my work in the 13 years in the public defender's office is constitutional based. And I say that, and my work in housing for 2 years was also constitutionally based, both in the federal and the California Constitution. However, even in older constitutions, the law may be there, but people have to follow it, right? Social norms have to catch up. Even in the US Constitution, even though India used it to build its own constitution, we had to catch up legally through the justice system just for civil rights and individual rights. And are still, if many of you know, I'm limited in how much politics I can talk about, but it's in the news. Our courts are making decisions every day that affect everyone and some of their individual liberties. When I was in law school, I was lucky enough to study in London, and I was actually learning about the South African Constitution, but because it was built on the Indian Constitution and Parliament in England, I studied the Indian Constitution. And I'm thankful that the words, especially expressed by Dr. Ambedkarji, are there about liberty and fraternity and equality. And again, as our Honorable Leela said, they're way ahead of our time. As most of you know, in Buddhist principles, women and men were equal thousands of years ago, and the idea that we've spent thousands of years arguing about equality is almost silly when you think of how early that was brought in. So I think that the Constitution is written effectively. The problem is following the terms in the Constitution, right? And so if you have terms and people aren't following them, then you have to be able to enforce them. And I'm saying that as a judge because you have to have an avenue to be heard. And you have to have a system that works a little bit faster than sometimes it works when you're in India. And you also, I'm going to say this socialization-wise, you also have to have enough services in a community to understand that no matter the outcome of a case, if someone has done something to you based on a protected class, the outcome of the case isn't going to fix it. It's going to fix it for the group, but that's pain that we go through as a community before it happens. So as effective as I think it is, as soon as the law catches up with some of these basic human rights and has an effective way of addressing them and redressing them, then I think we have it. And it has to, and I'd say in a much faster manner. And an example even in India now is that, and I'm going to go back to education, is we know that certain things are outlawed. This happens in the United States too, dowry and child marriage and things like that. But we know that they still happen. They still happen even though they're outlawed. And if you have certain groups of people that are going to perpetuate it and either the law or the justice system is going to look aside and not follow through, then we can't change it. Then it doesn't matter what the words say. So it's again, and that's to the agitate and organize, right? We have to make sure that there is an agitation there to say it's still happening and then organize around it. So I think it definitely has the words there. It's a matter of the follow through.
Mm-hmm. I agree with all of that. I actually want to take even a step further what you were talking about with child marriage and human trafficking. I've been working in this space for a very, very long time. And in fact, a very good friend of mine, Giselle Portenier, is here tonight. We've been working on legislation around Canada regarding female genital mutilation. And it took years and years. I know Giselle's been working for a long time. It took 11 years of being able to talk to the diasporas around the world, because you can't, in a country of privilege, like I'm sitting here right now, point your fingers at other countries and say, that's wrong and that's not how you do it. You have to take the time to learn from those cultures, those people, and understand how it is that you change the way the perspectives are, but especially, again, in Canada. We just don't have that excuse to be able to sit in that space and allow those things to happen. Child marriage is still happening. Human trafficking is happening at incredible amounts in this country because it's hidden, because we're afraid to have the conversation. And I put this question to all of you, and it's not one you need to answer right now, but there is something called a bystander. And we talk about this in spaces of sexual assault and domestic violence all the time. How many times do we know that something is going on, but we don't say something because we're afraid of what's going to happen in our family, or what's going to happen in our culture, what's going to happen in our community, or what's going to happen because it's a family member that we love and that we don't understand how to deal with that. That is, at a minimum, where the words are there, but the actions matter. And this is where the big changes have to happen, is you have to be able to, in ways that are sensitive and compassionate and thoughtful, be able to stand up for the person who is beside you, who is being oppressed by something that it's not necessarily coming from a cultural perspective, but it is systemic in the systems that we work in the institutions, here even in Canada. So that is not to say that our constitutions are not beautiful documents that uplift our cultures, our countries, and who we are. But our ability to actually stand by the words that we write and be able to make those systemic changes is incredibly important and impactful to that next generation. I personally stand on the shoulders of so many women and men that came before me that plowed this space for me to even be able to be here in front of you as an elected official. So many, from different countries, from different perspectives. I'm here because they made that possible for someone like me. My responsibility is to make sure that that next generation, who are, I believe, are so much even better than we are, to have the ability to actually stand on the words that matter. Right now, our world globally is being pulled apart by division and ideology. We're being yanked apart from our families, our friends, the people that we love, through discussions of things that are not elevating our cultures and our countries and our people, but are actually being used to pull us apart and down to our lowest common denominator. What I would love to see is that the negotiation happens, that there's a willingness to have the conversation, that dignity and humanity are at the core of every single discussion that we have, that we're willing to have the difficult discussions, that we're willing to acknowledge that we're imperfect, but that imperfection is actually what leads us to better law and legislation. Because, as you know, the interpretation of law is up to the person that you're in front of at that moment. So how do we collectively change the mentality towards being that of human dignity and humility and compassion at the very, very core of every decision that we make? It's a lot to ask, but I have tremendous hope for the next generation to be able to bring that forward.
As lawyers, law graduates, judges, and legislators, we tend to have a legalistic view about things, but I'm glad that this panel has gone beyond the dry legalistic view. And we are talking about the social norms and how real change can be brought to the lives of people. So my next question would be on the same lines. So, like, we have discussed about the lofty constitutional ideas. We have discussed about how it's working globally in different legal systems. But I'll also like our panelists to enlighten us about what other instruments, other than the constitutional law and the legalistic principles, of course, like entrepreneurship, that we can use to empower people. Because we have to move beyond this legalistic view, and we have to bring real change to people's lives.
For this, I would like again to come back on the gender equality and our whole focus as a individual societies or countries or global commons. We have to focus our priorities on strengthening women's capacity, making them equal stakeholders in development, financial inclusion. So we have to, this is the way to go forward, because what is happening is that more than half of the world population is outside the formal education system. If I may quote some data by referring to my notes, for the education sector, despite education being wholly acknowledged as cornerstone of empowerment, globally only 49% have been achieved gender parity in primary education, 42% in lower secondary education, and 24% in higher secondary education. So you can see how much we have to catch up on this area. Similarly, we have to empower them by making them so economically relevant, social inclusion in that sense, because a lot of them are outside the formal financial system, or financial inclusions are not there in the gender this thing. And of course, we have to create leaders out of them. They are breaking this ceiling, glass ceilings in many countries. Especially, I'm very proud of how much we have done in our country in terms of gender equality in leadership. The current president of India is again a woman, which many of the developed countries have not achieved that. The heads of provinces, the Supreme Court judges, etc., etc. So the grassroots level democratic empowerment is happening so much in India. Panchayati Raj system was introduced. And if I may quote some of the numbers, we have today India is being served by over 19 million women in administrative offices, or over 17,000 women elected to the Panchayati Raj institutions. That is the lowest rung of democratic institution. And over 10,000 women in defense forces. So these are just snapshots. And I'm a very positive guy. I have a positive outlook to the world life. You have to keep historical and social context at the back of your mind, but we cannot be frozen in those periods, 1947 or 75 years ago. You have to keep moving forward. And rather than cribbing, we all here who are collected under this roof, all of us are emancipated already. We have got best of whatever the world has to provide. But of course, we have to contribute in our own way. Of course, there would be challenges. There is no easy answers. There are global frameworks are there, United Nations, Charter, institutions are there. So we have to, as I said, as an individual, as a society, as a country, as the global common, we have to work on it. But I think, from my point of view, I think we have to work really hard to improve the lot of women in our countries and our societies. And once we do that, I think education is your short recipe for getting the society people emancipated. Because once you educate, you will empower them, then they'll start thinking, they'll start doing their economic empowerment happens. So, certain steps are being taken in India. For example, I'll give you some practical, which makes both political and economic sense. What happened in India? A lot of our women folks, our country from rural women used to prepare food in wood-fired chulhas, stoves. So what did the government do? You can see both the political and the economic sense. LPG gas cylinder was subsidized, and people were told, those who have more than one cylinder, surrender it so that it can be provided to people who don't have that gas cylinders too. So what happened? At one shot, you replace the firewood stoves, you improve the life, because a lot of smoke and carbon monoxide, carbon dioxide, so health issues were removed. And another thing is that you started providing rural folks a bicycle to go to the school, So mobility, you empowered them by providing cycle to go to school. Mobility is there. You started providing gender different toilets for the girl child, because most of the girls could not go to school because there was no separate toilets for them, because they have biologically, girls have different requirements. So when you started making toilets for the girl child, enrollment started happening in India, more and more number. So a lot of things are being done, financial inclusion through technology, more bank accounts, direct benefit of transfers, Jan Dhan Yojana, so Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao, people from India will understand this phrase, save the girl child by educating them, things like that. So a lot of things are happening, and as I said, India being 75 years old, we are on the path of right track, and hopefully all this societal churning will happen. And once you are economically, educationally healthy society, it becomes possible to rule out all the discrimination and things like that. But a lot of efforts are being put in.
I think it's so important, everything that our Council General just said, especially as it came to recognizing the basics for young women as we make changes. And so I would say as we look to what other adjustments, first it's to what also she just said is to remember, that there are people who came before us to break all these ceilings. I tell a lot of people this, but in my chambers, so judges have chambers, which is my office, I actually have hung on my wall a really beautiful pair of Indian shoes. And people come in and ask me why I have a pair of Indian shoes in a portrait on my wall. And I tell people, because I have to remember what came before me. And I have to remember who came before me, who lost their lives before me. Because who would have thought that I'd be sitting in LA County as a judge? When my family came to Sacramento, I don't think anyone would have imagined that I'd be sitting here as a judge, because they didn't think it was possible yet. And so the first thing I think we have to do is remember how hard it was and what they went through before us. And then I would remind everyone that the other instrument means it starts at home, because it's all well and good to come and have these conversations, but if you go back home and you're not making sure your daughters are educated and you're picking one child over the other and you're making those decisions that we know families sometimes have to make, then we can't effectuate the change that we just sit and have conversations about. So at home, it has to be more than just talk, right? We actually have to put in it. And then we have to become role models in our own communities, recognizing that everything we do, if we are really working towards equality, is watched and is an example for another. And a lot of what he just said about education. So our biggest instrument beyond the government is education, to make people aware of their origins and their power. And I say power not just, much like the power you talked about, the power you have to elect the people around you, but the power to actually be and just be heard. And once we can empower people, but again, starting with ourselves, starting at home, making sure that we're saying and doing the things that we want to do and putting it out there, then I think we could start to effectuate real change. And we have to be that change. It's so often that we can have these conversations and then I'll go back and I'll talk to other people in our community and the same things are happening. So I would say, see the change, but be the change and make the change happen. And those are instruments that are outside of what the government can give you.
Thank you. Education, education, education. Like both of you have said, this is probably the most important thing. And this isn't about even higher education. This is at the familial level. Women are 51% of the population right now. It's an extremely powerful position to be in. But we don't want to also make the same mistakes that have been made before us. We have to empower differently. I have 2 sons, and I can honestly say that we've raised really good men, really good men. My sons are 24 and 26, and they are wonderful, impassioned, thoughtful, and very, very enlightened young men. But it's because they've had the support of their baba and their dadi and their nainama and their tata on my side, because they had their elders. Our elders are our diamonds. They're everything to us. In many, many philosophies, there's a piece of worship almost that is there for our elders. So for our elders, understand how important and how privileged a position you sit in to teach the next generation. Understand that your words and the way you behave and the way you raise your grandsons and granddaughters matters. My husband and I live to speak to our elders in our family. It's everything to us. We don't really make a single decision without talking to them. I suppose it's partly cultural, but it's also a huge respect factor that we have in our family. But it doesn't mean that we also haven't disagreed and had some very heated discussions around life and family and moving forward. But because the elders in our family gave us the scope and the space to have those discussions, I think all of us have become better for it. And I know my sons would do anything for their grandparents, absolutely anything. It's a hugely powerful position to be in. So please understand that power and what that means to that next generation and their strength and their capacity and their willingness. It's a huge tool that we forget about quite often because we take it for granted that we just respect our elders. It's more than that, way, way, way more than that. And there is a piece too that I'd also like to talk about in terms of tools is the economic side of things. Equality only matters if opportunity is equal. That's it. If you are in any way stopped from being successful because of what you look like or who you love or what your caste is or what your status is in the world, we cannot say that we have equality. And we have to challenge the norms, and we must challenge the status quo. It doesn't mean that we forgo tradition or important things or where we came from. It means that tradition evolves as we evolve as a human race, as we evolve as a community. Here in Canada right now, the minorities are now the majority. That's an amazing thing to think about. We have our Indigenous peoples whom we honor every single day for sharing this land with us. But every single one of us outside of that is an immigrant to this country. We're a settler. And when you think about what we've grown and what we've done here, it's amazing. So many of you in this room left the comfort of your homes, your families, who you were in order to come here to this very cold place at times to start your life, to have a better opportunity for your children. It wasn't easy. You took a huge risk leaving a place of comfort and a place that you understand to come here and build this country. So take so much pride in what you bring to this country. Take that pride to the next level, whereby you empower your children and your grandchildren to be better than the generation before them, to not be oppressed by the things that you may have been oppressed by. To take it to that next level so that those of us who are in positions of being your consul general or being a judge in the Supreme Court or being a politician are elevated by the work of the people. Because every single person in this room will impact another person by your words, by who you are, what you say, and how you raise your children and your grandchildren. And at the end of the day, everything we're doing here, it's not for us. It's for our kids and for our grandchildren. So understand that power. Know that the bystander, the person who stands by quietly and allows things to happen that are inappropriate or do not stand by the words of the Constitution, those of us who stand by quietly are actually engaging and continuing a bad process. But if we have the power and the ability and the strength to say the words that are not easy, we can actually change those things and actually stand by the words that Baba Sahib said to us 100 years ago, 150 years ago. We can actually make that change. So I know for myself, being an imperfect human, I fail all of the time. But I'm aware of it, and I know that every single time I have the opportunity to say the words, I'm going to do that. I'm certainly going to try. And trust me, there are consequences, major ones, for that. But the worst consequence is that we don't actually see this change happen. So thank you.
Our panelists have given us a lot of food for thought today. Mr. Manish has talked about the constitutional law as a tool of nation building. And from the Honorable Judge, we have learned about the social norms and law and how we need to be the change we want to see in the society. And the Honorable MLA has talked about the family system that is the building brick of the society. So we are left with a lot of ideas that we can take home and think about it. In the closing, I'd like to ask for the closing remarks from each of our esteemed panelists.
So our final 2 points, 2 thoughts. One I would like to borrow from my earlier fellow panelists. We have to be the agent of change, and we have to contribute back to society. As I said, all of us are privileged lot, so we have to give it back to the society. And of course, start recognizing the centrality of women power, Nari Shakti, who can make a meaningful change in the society. Society-wide transformation can happen once we start and working for women empowerment, and just not take them as a beneficiary of development, but empower them. So if we this is as Mrs. Ahir had said, 51% are women folks. So if 51% of people of this global planet is not mainstreamed, how do you find to make a country or the world a just place for everybody to live in? So be the agent of change, start practicing it, and don't forget after getting out of this hall. As you said, start from within your family. Don't start discriminating that give one more rasgulla to your son and one less to your child. So simple things, so things like that. Thank you, and it was a wonderful panel, and that's my few closing remarks.
Thank you very much for inviting me and making me part of such an esteemed panel. And I'm going to close with a story about being the agent of change. So when I was born, during that time, laddus, which everybody here knows what laddus are, okay, were only given when boys were born. But I came out, and this was before gender reveal parties started fires or anything like that. But when I was born, my mom's mom, my nanny, said, no, we're going to stop this. She went home, she made all these laddus, and I'm not that young. This was, let's say it's over 40 years ago, okay? She made all these laddus, and she started taking them to her friend's house. And her friends would say, but you had a granddaughter, and she said, you better eat that laddu, right? But in that moment, she put all that hope for change in a laddu, right? Over 40 years ago. All that hope that we could celebrate, you know, when people were still saying, no, we're only going to celebrate when boys are born. And she became the agent of change for all of us, right? She really did. So in my closing remarks, I would say, eat your laddus for everyone, right? But also to remember, it's educate, agitate, and organize, and I would add one other thing, become who you can be, and encourage others to as well.
Thank you. My last comments are around all of you and your power. Like I said earlier, we sit here in these positions of privilege, but you sit in your families and your lives every single day with a bazillion opportunities to see change happen. And it's so powerful. The smallest thing, gesture, kind word, dignity, makes all of the difference in the world. And if you can take that little bit of power and change one small thing within your own lives, for those of us who sit in these positions, we must follow. So we have to lead by example. So thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity.
Ladies and gentlemen, so we are left with a lot to think about tonight. As I'd like to close with Dr. Sahab Babaraudin Ambedkar's words. When he said that hero worship may be a road to salvation, in religion, but it's a certain road to degradation in politics. So it's ideas, and actions that make a change. It's important to venerate people who have made a change and who have contributed in upliftment of the humankind. But it's, again, I'll stress on ideas and actions that will make a change, and I'll take your lead tonight. And in the end, I'd like to invite Mr. Anand Bali. He's a member of the steering committee. He'll express his note of thanks and inform you about the further programs.
Thank you. So before we close day one today, I wanted to invite Mr. Ramesh. There's one of the video we forgot to play this morning. This girl actually did a testimonial speech in the parliament on Dr. Baba's birthday. So let's enjoy.
To provide us a more equal society. To recall his vision and ideas and highlight his vision, we have with us from Kerala, Anusha A.S., who would today express his her views in English today.
A very good morning to one and all present here. I'm reminded of the words of our very own President Srimati Draupadi Murmu when she was addressing a convocation recently. She said, Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar मेरे लिए भगवान समान है, क्योंकि उन्होंने कुछ ऐसा किया था जिसके कारण आज मैं आपके सामने खड़ी हूँ. He's like a god to me because he did something which has made me to stand in front of you in the position where I am today. So what exactly did Dr. Bhimrao Ambedkar do, which our president was talking about? Well, to know that, one has to know his story, his life, and above all, what he has lived for. As a young boy, he was forced to sit outside his classroom, couldn't touch the same pot as his classmates, was refused an education in Sanskrit, and had to face much more discrimination at every stages of his life, just for being born into a suppressed caste. But these did not deter him from his goal. His goal, to make every Dalit man realize their individual identity. His goal, to make every woman in this country cherish the prospects of freedom. His goal, to propel India into a future which guaranteed social justice and equality. What has always inspired me about Baba Sahib is his courage and determination. Despite all the hardships that he had to face in his life, he rose up from them with his determination. He answered his oppressors with his education to become one of the best leaders that this country has ever seen. He was the boy who was forced to walk out of his classroom with his slate and gunny bag. Years later, he became the man who walked into this very parliament hall holding the greatest document of Indian history, the Constitution of India. He is that beacon of hope, not only for the Dalits, but for every person in this world who possessed the strength to rewrite their destiny. Independent India's first law minister, Baba Sahib was a leader who envisioned an India which believed in the religion of liberty, equality, and fraternity. It has been more than half a century since he's gone, but his beliefs and his teachings still stand relevant today. In the end, I would just like to conclude by quoting a few words about him, which says, इंसानों को गुलाम बनाकर हजारों बादशाह बने हैं. इंसानों को गुलाम बनाकर हजारों बादशाह बने हैं, लेकिन गुलामों को इंसान बनाकर सिर्फ एक ही बादशाह बने हैं. लेकिन गुलामों को एक ही बादशाह बने हैं, और वो है डॉक्टर भीमराव रामजी अंबेडकर. जय भीम, जय भारत.
जय भीम.